So I'm starting. So I want to call today's session of LA Jews for Peace monthly Zoom to order. And we're very lucky we have James Dorsey, who's the author of The Turbulent World Substack and has been a journalist, including much time in the Middle East for 50 some odd years. And before I turn this over to Dick Plotkin to introduce James, let me just say James and I started talking about him being a guest in August, and I was confident that with his title, The Greater Middle East is a Ticking Time Bomb, there would be things to talk about, but I never guessed 3 months ago that there'd be so many. And we all know what they are, and I'm sure James will talk about them. Before I go to give the floor to Dick, let me just talk about coming Zooms. After almost 80 Zooms, I think this is our 78th or so, we have none scheduled because our bank account was down to $8 after the lien on paying the honorarium to James. But I've told a few people and we're back up to about 400. But to run these things, it costs, we have a $300 overhead, $100 to keep our website going, $200 for our Zoom license, and we give an honorarium to each of our guests. So we do need, with the money that's now in the bank, we can go for a few months. But so I urge people to donate. And if you have trouble donating, just email me or call me up. So with that, I will end the share.
Okay.
And I will turn the floor over to Dick Plotkin, who will introduce our speaker.
James and I met in Amsterdam, I think it was 1973. And we had a mutual friend who since passed away, who was a member of Siach Siach was small Yisraeli in Tel Aviv, where he was a student, Arik Bronstein. And I have not had any contact with James since then. So that's about 50 years. But I get most of my news through YouTube, and I couldn't believe it. Up popped his blog or his entry on YouTube, and I wrote him. I found out his email, and it was the same James Dorsey that I met 50 years ago. So I was kind of excited about that event. And we already know about his history. He's worked mostly as a journalist over the last 40 or 50 years, and he also has a doctorate from the University in Utrecht. So I will, if there's anything that you think is critical, James, about that people should know about you, I'll give you the floor. And if not, you can just start your talk. And then we'll...
No, okay. Please, go ahead.
No, I mean, and then we'll ask you to talk for 20, maximum of 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A because we always have a lot of questions on our Zooms.
Absolutely. Dick, you have a much better memory than I have. And I need to thank both you and Jeff for putting this together. Indeed, the title of my remarks was overtaken almost by the minute that Dick and Jeff talked about it. Even so, I think it's a good way of looking at and beyond events as they unfold at what is basically a dizzying speed. And what I'd like to do is use the bulk of my time for discussion and questions and answers. So let me suggest some hopefully not too provocative bullet points as food for thought. First of all, Israel embodies Albert Einstein's definition of insanity, which is repeatedly trying the same thing in the expectation that it will produce a different outcome. In other words, the principles and policies that shape Israel's war conduct and attitudes towards Palestine, militant groups in multiple Arab countries, and Iran run a red thread through Zionist and Israeli history. These principles include domination and imposing by force Israel's narrative, will, and definitions of security in the belief that force is the only language the other understands. It's a belief that is accurate if one is willing to accept that
James,
there cannot be more than one narrative.
You're breaking up a lot. You're breaking up.
Sorry. The ways of can you hear me?
I hear you breaking
Hello?
up. Now it's
You hear
better.
me breaking up?
Yeah, but now it's stopped.
Okay. So let me just hark back a little bit. The principles include domination and imposing by force Israel's narrative, will, and definitions of security, in the belief that force is the only language the other understands. It's a belief that is accurate if one is unwilling to accept that there can be more than one narrative and that those narratives can contradict each other. The rise of Netanyahu's ultra-nationalist government has brought into sharp relief this underlying principle. I would argue that Israel's belief in the primacy of force explains why it insists on recognition of its right to exist, rather than a recognition of its existence, as is anchored in international law, but has no basis. But the right to recognition of the right to exist has no basis in international law. And in my mind, the reason why Israel makes that distinction and demands recognition of the right to exist is because what it's actually doing is demanding that the party recognizing Israel also recognizes the legitimacy or the accuracy of its national narrative. Diplomatic recognition of a state is recognition of the state. It does not mean that the state recognizing the other is accepting as fact the national narrative or the national myth of the state it is recognizing, nor does it mean that it is an endorsement of the state's policies. What Israel's trying to do with demanding recognition of the right to exist rather than simply its existence is exactly that. And that obviously is not going to happen if and when one gets a two-state solution. With other words, a Palestinian state will never recognize or accept as correct and legitimate the Israeli narrative, and it doesn't have to, as such. Moreover, the juxtaposition of the right to exist versus recognition of existence blurs the distinction between the right to self-determination and entitlement to a specific territory. This is not to deny that Jews have a relationship to Palestine, the land of Israel, or whatever one wants to call it, but others may derive valid rights from history and culture that are at least equally valid. That is what the United Nations, for all practical purposes, recognized in 1947 with the Partition Plan. The belief in the primacy of force is what drives Israeli policy of targeted assassinations that have failed to spark the collapse of groups like Hamas or Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed Lebanese Shiite militia. The belief in Israel's ability to destroy its non-state opponents has, in my mind, much to do with Israeli attitudes towards the Holocaust that go beyond its utility in Israel's national narrative. And what I'm referring to is two things, basically authored by Tom Segev, who many of you may know as one of the new historians, who wrote several books. One of those books was a book called The Seventh Million, in which he essentially described the almost impossible choice that the Zionist movement and David Ben-Gurion were faced with in the 1930s, which was the choice of trying to rescue European Jewry, leaving aside whether the Zionist
Something
movement
here
could have
from
done that.
Eric wanting a Zoom link.
He's on.
Hello?
Eric's there.
Thought he
Sorry?
was.
Somebody.
Can you hear me?
I don't see him.
Hello?
Yeah, I'll go send it to him.
Hello?
Just keep going. I don't know what it is.
Okay, sorry about that. Just in any case, so what Segev argued was that the choice was between trying to intervene on behalf of European Jewry or establishing a Jewish state for the next century, and essentially, if you wish, sacrificing European Jewry. Ben-Gurion obviously made the choice in favor of a Jewish state, and I'm not judging whether right or wrong here, but that I don't know of a statesman who's been forced with that kind of choice, like what the choice that Ben-Gurion faced in the 1930s. And what that does, in my mind, is put an enormous moral claim on the state that manifests itself in various ways. Segev wrote a second book entitled Elvis in Jerusalem. And in that book, he basically, among others, he was describing a transition from what he viewed as a Zionist to a post-Zionist world in Israel. But as part of that, he was describing certainly Israel's early attitudes towards the Holocaust, including how up until the early 1960s, the Holocaust was almost a taboo subject, and how Israelis often looked down on Jews because they looked at themselves as the muscular Jew versus the diaspora Jew that had allowed itself to be led to the gas chambers. And it is this sort of background, coupled with Israel's problematic insistence on the recognition of its right to exist, that constitutes one reason why Israel panics when its occupation of the moral high ground is threatened by, for example, free debate and freedom of expression, and proceedings in international courts and fora like the United Nations, its insistence on Israeli exceptionalism, and its monopolization of the Holocaust. The tragedy is that the degree of reputational damage Israel has inflicted on itself has yet to hit Israel, despite Israel's success in limiting debate in Western circles and securing Western support, even if that is starting to fray. Israel's rejection of ceasefires in Gaza and Lebanon has not only damaged the country's international standing, but also threatens Netanyahu's long-standing pre-Gaza war focus on forging long-standing ties to the global far right. Think of Netanyahu's alliance several years ago with Hungary's Viktor Orban against George Soros. That hasn't stopped the far right from supporting Israel's war, or that hasn't started far right support for Israel's war starting to fray, with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni suspending arms sales to Israel and Germany's Alternative for Deutschland calling for a weapons embargo. Add to this the fact that Saudi analysts close to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman suggest that Gulf states, like the United States and Europe, could reconsider Israel's geopolitical utility. The analysts point to Hamas and Hezbollah's resilience, Israeli intelligence failures, gaps in Israeli air defenses, Israel's vulnerability to cyber attack, and reluctance to see an ultra-nationalist Jewish state assert unchecked regional power, coupled with domestic public opinion as factors Gulf states are reconsidering. The last year has highlighted a widening gap, at least when it comes to Israel and Palestine, between autocratic Arab regimes and Arab public opinion. It's a concern for Arab leaders because Palestine has been a catalyst for the eruption into mass protest of social, economic, and political anger and frustration that simmers at the surface across the Middle East and North Africa. Bin Salman recently said as much when he noted that 70% of my population is younger than me. For most of them, they never really knew much about the Palestinian issue. And so they're being introduced to it for the first time through this conflict. It's a huge problem. Do I care personally about the Palestinian issue? I don't, but my people do. In this context, it's important to highlight the fact that the last year is likely to produce a generation of Palestinians, Syrians, Libyans, Yemenis that have no hope and nothing to look forward to. It's a generation that will likely respond with violence. In Israel-Palestine, that could take the form of a guerrilla war. I'm happy to talk in the discussion about the immediate threat of escalation in the Israeli-Iranian dynamic. The one note I would like to make here is that irrespective of one's evaluation of the threat posed by Iran, Iran offered Netanyahu the ability to further delegitimize Palestinian national aspirations by reducing them to being nothing more than part of the Iranian threat. All of which leads me to another point, and that is that Palestinians and Israelis are mirror images of one another. That is certainly true when it comes to hardliners on both sides of the divide. In other words, demonization has legitimized indiscriminate violence against the other. To Hamas, all Israelis are illegal settlers or associated with the Israeli military in one way or another, while Israel asserts that there are no innocent civilians. The arc of history, Palestinian and Arab responses to Zionist and Israeli history, is one of escalating violence, culminating in last year's October 7 attack by Hamas and Israel's response. It is an arc that is secured and fortified by demonization. There is, in my mind, a parallel to be drawn between the process the Palestine Liberation Organization under Yasser Arafat went through in the late 1970s and the 1980s, in which it moved from the concept of a secular democratic state, Palestinian dominated secular state, and a two-state solution. I think that we're seeing the same process, obviously with differences because of circumstances, the same process taking place within Hamas, with Hamas already having moved conditionally towards the notion of a two-state solution, even though the one-state solution, the Palestinian state replacing Israel, remains its ideal. The last point I want to make, and then open it up to discussion, is that unfortunately, fact of the matter is that it's been violence that puts Palestine on the map. It was the violence of the late 1960s, 1970s, the 1980s, the PLO attacks on or hijackings of aircraft, attacks on civilian targets in Israel. Think back to Ma'alot, Beit Shemesh, and multiple others. The covert war Israelis and Palestinians waged, particularly in Europe, but to some degree in Asia, with targeted assassinations. And now again, it was the violence of October 7 and the brutality of October 7 that has put Palestine on the map. So whether we like it or not, violence has served a purpose for both parties. And there's only obviously one way of trying to deal with that. Let me end here and open it up for conversation.
Okay, well, I have a lot of questions. Hold off until I see other people. You can just raise your hand, or else you can raise your digital hand as well. Either way. Well, I'll start out. And hold on. Jeff, did you have a question? I saw your hand come up and Yossi. Oh,
Yeah, okay. Thank you, James, for the interesting, I agree many stuff that you said, in this group is a little bit surprised. But one thing, don't take it as a criticism, but you left the US government off the hook. And why I'm saying it, because many people around the world, countries, organizations, movement, and also in Israel itself, among the Palestinians in the Arab world, the United States actually holding the key to resolve this once and for all politically, but they're not willing to use the key. They used the key one time when they forced Menachem Begin to make peace with Egypt. He really forced him, But after this, nothing happened. And under US watch, 600,000 settlers, occupation of 57 years, giving unconditionally military support, on and on and on. So I wonder your reaction to this, the role of the US of not resolving the conflict.
Sure. I think more accurate is not that I let the United States off the hook, but I didn't mention them.
Okay.
And the reason for it was that I really wanted to talk, at least sort of focus on underlying issues rather than go through the dynamics of the conflict as we have it now. Now, with regard to the there are several factors here. First of all, yes, the assumption is widely that all the United States has to do is, or that Biden has to do, is pick up a phone and things happen like this. That may be true and it may not be true. It certainly was true in 2021 when Biden basically picked up and said, look, this has to end and it has to end now. And you had a ceasefire a day later. I'm not sure that's the way it would work today for several reasons. One is leverage is a two-way road. With other words, you've got to have something to leverage, which the United States clearly has. But the other side of the coin is that the party that's being pressured has to feel that the price of not bowing to the pressure is higher than the price of bowing to it. So, with other words, we don't know how this Israel would respond. I think also historically, one's got to keep in mind that Israel's dependency on the United States, and there is a dependency without question, but Israel's dependency on the United States in many ways is reduced to what it was in the past. So if you go back 30 or 40 years, US aid to Israel was roughly 10% of GDP. It's today far less. So again, there is a US responsibility here. The one thing I will say is, in the current atmosphere, what we're seeing is increasingly European countries moving towards some sort of suspension of arms sales to Israel. One, we're seeing, interestingly enough, phrase in a mainstay of Israeli support for Israel, which was the far right. We're seeing that beginning to fray. And of course, last but not least, you have the letter that was written recently by Blinken in Austin to Yoav Gallant and Ron Demir, threatening an arms embargo. There are two things that I want to say about that, which I think is, one, we'll have to wait and see whether the United States is willing to put its money where its mouth is on this. But I think the timing at both ends of that letter is important. With other words, the timing in advance of the election, and many of you will probably have better or a keener sense of U.S. electoral politics than I do, but which probably is aimed at trying to win for the Democratic Party, for Kamala Harris, votes from the Arab and Muslim community. But I think the timing right after the deadline or the ultimatum falling right after the election is important, because that's the period where the administration may be freer to act and certainly going to be less inhibited by U.S. electoral politics. And the final thing I'll say on this is that it's post-election is going to be when we'll probably see somewhat clearer what Kamala Harris's position is. Fact of the matter is that she's going into this election not only as a Democratic candidate, but also as an incumbent, as vice president. And there's probably limits to what she can do in terms of criticizing the Biden administration's policy as long as they're in electoral mode. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Uri. Uri, do you have a question? Uri.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was entangled with the unmute. So first of all, thank you very much, James, for the presentation. I actually, I want to add a couple of pointers that I wanted to add and throw it at you and at the people. I basically contend that since 29 years ago, when Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated, sitting prime minister being assassinated in the center of the city, there were two factions in the Zionist from the beginning. There was one that says everything is ours, we'll kill them or we will subjugate them. The other one said there are too many, we need to get to some kind of accommodation with them. 29 years ago, the faction that said everything is ours won. And they feel uninhabited in basically following the messianic idea of everything is ours, at least everything west of the Jordan, because there's, I don't know if you saw a few months ago, Smotrich was in Paris, and behind him there was a map which shows the two banks of the Jordan River. And it got King Jordan to go. I mean, King Abdullah of Jordan to go crazy because they never gave up on the idea of the East Bank. So I contend basically that as long as that faction is winning, nothing is going to restrain them. And I don't know if you saw last couple of days ago, they talk about actually starting the whole conversation about resettling in Gaza. So in other words, the thing that the Zionist always says, you're paranoid. We don't want to do a population cleansing or ethnic cleansing. This is really your craziness. All of a sudden, the Messianic side said, yes, that's what we intend, and we're not making any bones about it. So this is one thing I wanted to add to the mix, not because you didn't deal with it. The other thing I wanted to raise for you, I contend basically the United States is not going to do anything about Israel because Israel is the best salesperson of the military-industrial complex of the United States. And I tell all my friends, you noticed Congress gave them $18 billion extra? The Israelis complained about that they were shortchanged because if they were a good salesperson, they should get 10% of the proceeds. So that's why they threw 18 billion at them and say, okay, here's a voucher, guy, get some more thing, because the two out of the 5 strongest lobbyists in the US Congress, the military industrial and the Israeli lobby, are 2 out of 5 who actually run the United States. The other thing is the medical insurance, the fossil fuel, the banking and the insurance companies. There are 5 who run this country. 2 out of the 5 are actually interested in Israel doing what they're doing because it's good for business. Every war the Israelis do, we sell another 100 countries in the world more of our ware because they see it works. So this is just my contribution to this conversation. Thank you.
Let me thank you for that. Let me just respond to your first point. Basically, I think, yes, there is that differentiation. Having said that, I don't think I would describe the revisionist part of the Zionist movement, the Jabotinsky wing, if you wish, as messianic. It was certainly demanding in terms of territory and who had rights and who didn't, but it was not a messianic movement. More importantly, there is an argument to be made, and I'm increasingly leaning towards it, that the difference between the 2 wings of the Zionist movement are seem more important than they may be. Let's keep in mind that the settlement movement on the West Bank started with the Labour Party. It was not Likud. It obviously gained and mushroomed and so on and so forth, going back to the Alon plan and whatsoever. What I want to do finally in responding to your first point is respond with 2 vignettes. One is Raimonda Tawil, who many of you may recognize, who was sort of the spokesperson for the West Bank for a long time and became Arafat's mother-in-law. And I remember having lunch with her in the 70s sometime in Akko at a fish restaurant. And she picked up her knife and fork and she said, the difference between Likud and the Ma'arach is Likud, a Ma'arach will eat us with a knife and fork. Likud will just grab us with no, and there's a degree of truth in that. The second vignette I'll give you is Asa Weizmann, who at the time, after the visit to Jerusalem, at the time of the meeting in Ismailia, at some point stood up in Gaza at an Israeli office, and behind him was a map of the Likud's map of Palestine at the time, or of Israel, which was both sides of the Jordan River. And so he was asked about that in terms of the Egyptian, moves towards an Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty, and he was asked about it in terms of Arafat and the PLO's secular democratic state, and his response was, pointing to the map, they can dream, and I can dream. So let me just give you that as a vignette. Again, I'm, you're a much keener and closer observer, presumably, of U.S. politics than I am. The one note that I will make is, in my mind, no country has a grassroots base in the United States in the way that Israel does. And that goes back to, the origins of Zionism. I think one has to keep in mind that the part of the Zionist movement's success was its appeal to non-Jews, its appeal to Christians, or evangelicals and other. And you go back to people like Lord Balfour. What drove them was not love for the Jewish people or concern for Jewish nationalism. It was basically their own Christian beliefs in which Israel played a certain role. So I think I would argue that, with other words, support for Israel is a much more complex issue.
Jeff.
Thank you, James, especially for just a second. especially for the discussion of the difference between the right to exist and the recognition of the existence. That I thought was very profound. I have two short questions. The first is the Iranian threat. You mentioned the Iranian threat, and I wonder how serious the Iranian threat really is. Because especially since the Iranians who clearly don't want a regional war and have seemed so hesitant about reacting to the aggression of Israel on Iranian land and people and so on. The second question I want to ask is, what really drives Israel to push for assassinations? They've been assassinating Palestinian leaders since 1976, and they never work. They always say, we got this guy, it's going to solve our problems, and it never works. Will they ever learn? Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. With regard to Iran, I think one's got to differentiate between rhetoric and fact. And the Iranian rhetoric is blood-curdling at times. Let's be clear about that. There's no question about it. Having said that, I think attitudes are far more complex. Jewish communities rally together when there is a real threat. In the early 1980s, I went to synagogue in Tehran, and a man got up during the service or during the sermon and complained. He was from Ahwaz on the Shatt al-Arab in the south, and there were a fair amount. That was where the Iran-Iraq war was being fought out. A lot of Jews from those areas were migrating, fleeing to Tehran. And he got up and he complained about the fact that nobody was giving them housing, was helping them, even though at that point, lots of Jewish homes were standing empty with maybe one guardian because the families had left. And what I thought at the time was, if this was a community that was really under pressure, it would be standing together much more, particularly that in that sermon, the rabbi at the time was thanking the Iranian regime for not drafting Jews into the military to fight the Iraqis. Now, obviously, there was a financial contribution that facilitated that. So what I'm trying to say with this is that Iranian attitudes are far more complex. The Iranians, my sense is that the Iranians were double-edged in October of last year, when Hezbollah opened hostilities against Israel. On the one hand, sure, it positioned Iran as the backer of groups that were willing to stand up to Israel in a world in which, Arab world, in which nobody was willing, or very few were willing to do so. But it also had the risk of exactly what we're seeing now, of Iran threatened with being dragged into an all-out war with Israel, a war it knows it can't win. And as a result of that, its responses. And I think, again, we've got to, if you go back over the last year, just to take the last year, there have been repeated Israeli provocations, whether those were attacks on Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps personnel in Syria or in Lebanon, or whether those were the attacks on the Iranian diplomatic mission in Damascus, or the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas political leader in Tehran in late July. And Iran's been very careful in responding to those things. To me, the fundamental position of the Iranians on the Israel-Palestine question is that they will accept whatever the Palestinians accept. With other words, what does that mean? Does that mean that Iran will the next day establish diplomatic relations with Israel? Probably not. But it means that as such, the conflict has been resolved for that at that point. If you go back to November of last year,
Just a second.
when you
what that means is that Iran is real. It's just rhetoric when they say they want to destroy Israel.
Well, I'm okay. Let me just finish my thought and then come back to what you said, because that's part of the answer. In November of last year, you had a summit of Arab and Islamic countries in Riyadh, called to discuss the Gaza war. The summit ended with a statement that was signed by all states, including Iran, calling for a two-state solution. So I have no doubt that there are elements within Iran that want to destroy Israel and are uncompromising, just as there are elements in Israel that are uncompromising when it comes to Iran. But I think that overall, if and when the Palestinians accept, let's be clear, a credible Palestinian entity, which in this case would either be the Palestine Authority or Hamas, or a combination of the two. If a credible Palestinian Authority accepts a deal with Israel, the Iranians will fall into place.
I think not only Iran, the entire Muslim world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Samir, you're next. You have a question?
Hi, everybody. Hi, James. Thank you.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you. All right. Well, I didn't want to talk about Iran and whatever, but since you discussed this now and Jeff brought it up and all of that, in my opinion, that Iran and Iranians in general, they like to buy and sell, like the bazaar. I mean, the word bazaar came from them. And for them, I think they have been buying and selling the Palestinian question. I don't think that they believe in it, or they don't consider even. I mean, if you really go into the textbook, school books in Iran, they never mention Israel as an enemy, ever. And from our experience now in the last 14 years, we know what Iran did. I mean, Iran actually killed more Muslims in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon than what Israel did in the last 76 years. So, I mean, they cannot fool the Arabs anymore. Iranian cannot fool, and they should not fool Israel either. Iran, what Iran wants to be just to be recognized as a dominant power in the Middle East. And they want to stay in power. I mean, they don't want to go away. And that's their concern. So it's not their concern, I mean, whether the Israeli or Palestinian, whether, it doesn't matter. Actually, I mean, I think that they are responsible about what happened in Gaza. I mean, I blame them more than I blame Israel. I mean, it is, I mean, the way, I mean, they fooled probably Hamas, and they fooled everybody, fool all their, oh, we're behind you, we're gonna support you, we'll go all the way, and we saw it's nothing. And all of that, I mean, those missiles and strike, and it's all, I mean, just like fireworks. It wasn't really fair. And they didn't kill anybody. They didn't kill any Israelis. They killed the Palestinian. So forget about Iran. Now I want to come back to my original question, what I want, or not a question, but comment, and I want to see how you react to it. Coming back to 1987, the war, the June war. Israel won that war, and they captured territories they never dreamed of. The West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem and part of Egypt, Sinai, and the Golan Heights. It was like, I mean, for them, they never dreamed of, and they got all of that territories. But after the war ended, those Israeli leaders at that time, Golda Meir and then Moshe Dayan or whatever, I don't think that they had an idea what to do with that territories. Or it seems to me like they were so damn stupid, they didn't know what to do with it. In my opinion, they had two options, which is anybody, I mean, who has a sense of military concept, or I mean, even I mean political thinking. You captured a territory, okay. You have to either annex it to your territory and just copy what you did prior to 1967, like early 60s, after you captured all Palestine, and then you kept the military rule until 1960, 62, 63, and then you decided, okay, we'll give the Palestinians equal rights and right to vote, and they are citizens of Israel, and it became democratic. And then 1967, it came, and they captured all of that. Well, easy thing to do is just to copy what you did before, to annex the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem, and okay, this is all Palestine, one democratic state, one secular democratic state, equal rights to everybody, and that's it, end of the story. And the Golan Heights, you make peace treaty and return the Golan Heights to Syria, and you also talk to the Egyptians, and the same thing, you talk to them and make peace with them, peace treaty for the land, you give them back the Sinai, and that's it, end of the story. They could have done that. That's one option. The other option is, I mean, either you keep it, you keep the land, or you give it away. That means after that, I mean, the UN resolutions 242 and 338 asking them to pull out of all the pre-1967 and give it back. And that could have also ended the conflict, because that would have been allowed the Palestinian to have their Palestinian state, and the Egyptian get back their land, and the Syrian get, and that's it. Peace would have occurred. So they didn't do this, they didn't do that. They did just stupid. They just kept occupying the land until today. I mean, over the years, I mean, none of the Israeli leaders thought about it. What the heck, I mean, you're doing? Either, I mean, you were so damn stupid, you didn't copy what you did before, since 1948 until 1967, and you're so damn stupid that you could not keep occupying that forever. You should have returned it back. So that was the major thing, I think. I mean, until today, I didn't see any Israeli leader thought about it. That's the main thing. Either, I mean, you do damn one secular democratic state, or two-state solution. End of the story. That's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me respond first to the Iranian part of this, and you'll allow me to suggest that I think it's more complex than that.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
If you look at Iran, the first year post-revolution was a year of revolutionary zeal. In fact, the first foreign visitor on the level of a statesman was Yasser Arafat, who landed in Tehran immediately after the revolution, within a couple of weeks. And at the time, the building of the Israeli embassy was handed over to the Palestine Liberation Organization, and the street on which the building was renamed Palestine Street.
Yeah.
Things changed immediately after the Iraqi invasion of Iran in September 1980. That was the moment at which you saw the return of a sense of nationalism rather than of revolutionary zeal. And Iran's been a nationalist country ever since. It's maintained the rhetoric. I think there is on parts of the regime genuine support for the Iranians or for the Palestinians. I don't think that it's fair towards the Iranians to say that they're responsible for what happened in Gaza and for October 7. I don't think they even knew, frankly. That's not to say that Iranians haven't supported
We don't know.
Hamas.
We really don't know if they really know or not. I mean,
well, that's I would be willing to state with some degree of certainty that they were not informed. I don't even think, from my understanding, that the exile part of Hamas knew the details of all of this. This was placed very close to their chest. But more fundamentally, going to this, I do not use the word proxies. I describe Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the various Iraqi
they are
groups,
part of Iran, yeah. Part of.
Hold on, as non-state actors with interests of their own, that may or may not at certain points coincide with those of the Iranians. That's not to say that the Iranians don't have influence. It's not to say that the Iranians don't support financially, with weapons, with know-how. But the relationship of Iran with each of these groups is a different relationship. And the relationship with Hamas is the most complex relationship, and at times troubled relationship. And not because Hamas is primarily Sunni and the other groups are Shiite. I don't think that has anything to do with it. But it does have to do with, for example, policies towards Syria and so on, where Hamas basically moved out. And one of the problems in the competition to succeed Yahya Sinwar for Khalid Meshal is the fact that he was the driver of the rupture with Syria at the time and with Iran. And therefore his relationships with Iran are far more complex. So I think that Iranian support for, and the last thing I'll say about Iran is let's be clear. You have in Iran a generation of aged revolutionaries who are keeping up a facade, which does not necessarily mean that there is not genuine support for the Palestinians. Now, with regard to 67 and the conquest of the territories, again, you went through phases. Israel did not know necessarily what it wanted to do. And its initial reaction was to use the territories as bargaining chip to negotiate a peace treaty. And that was essentially squashed, any hope for anything like that, leaving aside whether the Israelis were serious or not about it. That was squashed with the Khartoum Arab Summit, when basically the three no's came out. And the Israelis had this false security belief that territory and territorial depth was what was going to give them security. But I think increasingly and very early on, there clearly was never an intention to share or return East Jerusalem. The Golan Heights, with some adjustments, were negotiable. Obviously, Sinai was negotiable, but I think increasingly what you saw was a belief in Israel that you could hold on to the territories with some sort of formal Palestinian governance that would operate under Israeli tutelage. And the belief that you can do that is one that still drives policy. And again, to me, is an example of Israel matching Einstein's definition of insanity.
It is. Well, I mean, in a way, I mean, if they, at that time, after the Khartoum Arab Summit, Israel should have recognized that the Arabs, no, that means return it back to them. That's it. Return it and make peace.
The no was not a no for a compromise. The no in Khartoum was a rejection of the state of Israel, period, and its
that's
existence.
fine. That's fine.
The Arabs were not at that point, or not at a point where they were capable or willing to think of a territorial compromise.
Well, I understand. I mean, if I am Israel at that time,
that really only came in the early 1980s with King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia.
No, I understand. I know. I lived all of that. The Palestinian question is all my life, so I witnessed it.
I'm sure.
I know their leaders. I know with them. I mean, I know it. What I'm saying that Israel, when they saw that, okay, the Arabs, they don't wanna recognize, no negotiation, no recognition, nothing. That means if I am the Israeli, okay, I have that territory, I will retain that land for peace. I just implement the UN resolution. I don't need to negotiate.
You gotta have a peace partner. You gotta have a peace partner at that time, at that moment.
No. I disagree with that. You don't need a peace partner if you know that you occupy this land. This is occupied. The UN, represent the whole world. The whole world is telling you to get out. You just implement the UN resolution. You don't need to talk. You don't need to negotiate, nothing. Implement the UN resolution.
I'm going to jump in.
That's the issue.
Samir, we'll pick this up later.
Yeah. Okay. No, I'm just trying to, I mean, think that why they didn't do it. Why those Israeli? I mean, they didn't think right. They did not think correctly.
Okay. Are there more questions?
All right.
Okay. Well,
thank you anyway, James. Thank you.
Okay.
No, pleasure.
Question about the United States. The United States has fought war after war after war. It has lost. It withdrew troops from Vietnam. It withdrew all of its troops from Iraq, well, almost all of them, from Afghanistan. And it has the ability to just not to do deficit spending, and it now has, I think, $35 trillion in deficits. So the question is, how long can this proceed? And I've argued with a lot of people. I'm an active in Jeff Halper's group, that you can't assume that the U.S. will be a hegemonic force in perpetuity. No empire has ever lasted forever. So there's some point that it will either can't or won't be able to exert its will. Now, the only person I know who's really tried to set a date is Chalmers Johnson, who died over 10 years ago, and he said probably the year 2050. But we don't know when, but we know sooner or later it will happen. Now, In the meantime, the United States has really squandered whatever goodwill it's had regarding around the world, except for Europe, and Europe is slowly retreating from the United States. So what do you see is happening with the United States in this? I mean, you said that Israel requires less support than it did before from the United States, but to wage so many wars and so many fronts, it can only happen with US support. If the US didn't supply the weapons and it didn't supply the diplomatic support, Israel would have to fold. It could maybe last a week or 2 weeks, but it would fold. So how do you assess the role of the United States? I mean, one more point. We know that we have two parties that are strongly in Israel's lap, but this is not going to last forever. That's my closing remark.
Sure. I mean, look, just to be clear, what I said is that Israel's dependency on the United States has changed, not because of the United States, but also because of the growth of the Israeli economy and the technology sector and the military industrial complex in Israel. Now, having said that, clearly the US is not going to be a hegemon into perpetuity. I think we're moving, frankly, towards a tripartite rather than or tripolar rather than a bipolar world. I think we take India out of the equation at our peril. And we're moving into a situation in which the middle powers are going to have far greater flexibility and far greater leverage and maneuverability than they've had in the past. Having said all of that, and again, this is not eternal, but it is for some time to come, I question what loss of credibility or loss of US credibility means. So, with other words, sure, has the United States lost a lot of its appeal, public appeal, in many parts of the world? Absolutely, for a variety of reasons. Its policies, not just foreign policies, but also domestic policies. For many today, going to an American university is probably not very attractive given restrictions on freedom of expression, and so on and so forth. But when it comes down to hard geopolitics, I think the picture is a very different picture. What you've seen is that countries like this, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, not only put an emphasis in terms of their security relationships on the United States, rather than first and foremost China, which is not interested and also not capable at this point. But you also see that in the technology relationship. Both the Saudis and the UAE in recent months have made it very clear that they are willing to reduce their technological cooperation with the United States in exchange for. So I think one's got to be somewhat sanguine about what loss of US credibility means.
Dick, did you? Well, I have.
I think Dick,
unmute yourself, Dick.
The question that I have is, are you saying that the United States is going to continue to support Israel pretty much alone at this point? I mean, I guess Germany is providing about 29% of Israel's weapons. The United States provides the remainder for a long time to come. I mean, without weapons, I mean, how could Israel sustain its? How could Israel have a war with Iran, with Syria, with Iraq, with Gaza? with Lebanon? I mean, I just don't see it without the sustained support of the U.S.
First of all, German military support for Israel. German arms sales to Israel last year were $20 million. German arms sales to Israel this year are $32,000. So that's substantially been reduced. What I'm saying, will the United States support Israel, period? First of all, it depends what happens in the elections. I think that you're going to find Trump far more empathetic to Netanyahu and his policies than you would find with the Democratic Party. Is that something that's going to be sustainable for Trump or not? We'll have to wait and see. I think the Democratic Kamala Harris administration is probably going to be tougher on Israel and probably turn tougher on Israel very quickly. Whether that means a total rupture, I would doubt. But I think that you are going to see changes in U.S. policy. I don't see how this is sustainable, frankly. I find it amazing that it's been sustainable until now. I don't know if that answers the question.
That's a good answer.
Okay, I asked
Hold on, I think David Mandel has a question. Let's ask David. David, are you there?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Dick. And hi, James. It's good to see you after all
Hi,
these
David.
years.
Absolutely. We've met at one point, I think. I'm not sure.
Oh, we met a long time ago when I was living in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. But
yeah, exactly.
Since then, I don't think so. Anyway, yeah, no, we hung out quite a bit. We were both working as journalists and at that time.
Absolutely.
They're talking like 45, 50 years ago. Anyway,
indeed.
I'm sorry I missed the beginning, and stop me if you've already addressed this to some extent. I had another meeting that I had to be at, so I came in just as you were finishing your opening. Given what you're saying, and I agree with you pretty much, and that I don't think U.S. support for Israel is going to be long-lasting in the way that it is now. Whoever gets elected now, I mean, there are going to be twists and turns along the way, but I substantially agree that it's not going to be there. But I looking at and trying, being in touch with people I know who are still living there, Israeli Jews who are friends of mine and Palestinians who are friends of mine. I don't know how closely you are in touch with some of those people, and maybe some others here are more so, but I'm profoundly pessimistic about the ability of that state to arrive at any kind of a reasonable diplomatic solution with the Palestinian people at this point. I think things have gone so far off the rails in terms of militarism, in terms of self-victim feeling like we are the victims, and on the other side, this is our country and screw the rest of them. I mean, I've heard people who were kind of reasonable and would have supported a reasonable diplomatic solution now saying, "I give up, kill them all." I literally have heard that from people, and I just and if that's the attitude that has become prevalent in Israel, and I think Samira was very much right. They missed the opportunity, and I'm so what is going to become of all those people? Are they going to I don't know, are they really going to lose out and become really become the victims of a Palestinian victory with the help of Iran and others, or is mass immigration a possibility? I know I hear that a lot of people are leaving. I've heard different numbers, some of which seem exaggerated, but of course, most of the people there don't have second passports and can't just pick up and leave, even if they wanted to. So I don't know if you how closely you stay in touch with things that are going on in Israeli society. I try to, not nearly as much as I should maybe, or could, but the future looks really dark.
I do stay in touch very closely and do still travel significantly. Having said that, yes, Israel's lost one opportunity after the other. I think
Many.
as flawed as the Oslo Accords were, Israel ensured that they weren't going to be implemented. And you can go down the line. There were moments where the Israelis had brighter moments, and whatever one thinks of the flaws of them, but nonetheless, proposals put forward by Ehud Olmert and by Ehud Barak, but nonetheless. And the problem with Arafat, of course, was that Arafat always thought there was a better opportunity around the corner, rather than grabbing an opportunity and then trying to leverage it. Having
Well, he
said
did
all of
grab
that,
it, but I mean, the Israelis didn't honor it. He did grab it.
Arafat too. Yes and no, but okay, let's not get into that discussion right now.
Well, I mean,
I think going forward, I think the Israelis are going to be in for a very tough time, and we don't know what the dynamics of that are. There's no question that Israeli society has moved to the right, and was moving to the right, starting with the Begin electoral victory in 1977. And in a sense, you could look at the Labour governments as interim periods in that process of moving towards the right. We don't know what the impact is going to be of the dynamics of once you get a ceasefire in Gaza. I think unless there is a credible day after scenario in Gaza, you're going to see the evolution of a guerrilla war, not only in Gaza but also in the West Bank. I don't think that Israelis have yet been hit by the cost of reputational damage.
And also within 1948 Israel, I would think, this guerrilla
Sure.
war.
In terms 1948, in terms of
No,
a guerrilla war, yeah,
within
absolutely.
within the borders of pre-67 Israel, it's going to happen there.
Absolutely, and you saw sort of first signals of that during the 1921 Gaza war, when you had the eruption of communal violence in pre-1967 Israeli cities. There's no doubt about it. I mean, in a sense, it's harking back to the 1960s, 1970s thing. But I also, furthermore, don't think that the Israelis quite understand yet how much reputational damage they've done to themselves and what the cost of that is going to be. Some academics are finding that out. The defense industry is seeing the first signs of that, for example, with being excluded from defense exhibitions in France twice now. But these are all very early signs of that. So what I'm getting at is this is not going to be a status quo situation in much of the same way that we had post 1967. This is going to there are a bunch of dynamics here that are hard to predict how exactly they're going to play out.
Our next person is Ellie. You have a question?
Yeah, thank you, James, for your talk. There's so many things that I need to grapple with that you had pointed out that maybe I didn't emphasize in my own thinking about things. My question is as follows. I really believe that United States hasn't set I think Israel will only go so far as United States will let it. It's sort of a precocious child, and it's a dysfunctional relationship, and the United States has been enabling the dysfunction. And my question to you is are the Israel systems and United States Israel's policies and for the most part and United States policy for the most part, are they really incongruent or are they collusive? I mean, I see them as one and being the same one and the same thing. I really see there's no daylight. Otherwise, the United States would let it happen. And to that degree, I see what Blinken is doing is just a charade. Or charade of a shuttle policy. What are your thoughts?
Well, let me say two things. One is I think that there are three phases, if you wish, in the Israeli-U.S. relationship. The first phase was the labor-dominated phase, in which the absolute principle was you ensure that you have the United States' back. You don't do anything that would create a rupture. Then you had Begin, who basically said, we're independent. We've been around for 3,000 years, whatever it is, we're independent. But nonetheless did not fundamentally break with US policy. And then you've had Netanyahu, who, to be fair, has been brilliant at playing US politics. And that, I think that goes to a second issue, which I forget who it was, but someone, I think maybe it was Uri, alluded to that, and that is that the Israeli, I mean, if you look to use the word whatever one thinks, if one looked at the Zionist movement as a national liberation movement, no national liberation movement has been as effective at lobbying than the Zionist movement has. It's been an effort that goes back to Chaim Weizmann. It's been a century long, and nowhere has its impact been felt greater than in the United States. And that's part of what we're seeing today. So, there is a significant part of the United States, both official and public, that buys into a lot of these notions, even if its interests, even if one could argue that its interests lie elsewhere. So I don't know how much of this is, with other words, collusion. I would be cautious with that. But what I think is certainly the case is that Israel sets the tone, and US officials often aren't willing to go against that for domestic political reasons.
That's really changing in popular opinion. I really think so.
Probably. I mean, again, I have seen less of whether or not there's been change, for example, in the evangelist community. I think there's significant change in significant segments of the U.S. society, but I can't put it in perspective in a sense. Jeff, I think you need to unmute.
Okay. I had asked before, and I'm going to ask again. The assassinations that Israel has been doing since 1976, they always claim it will solve all their problems, and it never does. And this is really a case of this Einstein business. What do you think drives them to focus so much on assassinations?
Look, yeah, no, and I apologize. You did ask the question earlier, and I didn't respond to it just simply because I forgot it.
I know.
I think that, look, I think that the targeted assassination policy is part of a larger policy. which is based on the notion that all they understand is force. You know, if you're saying all they understand is force, and if your whole policy is a policy of coercion, of repression, of beating into submission, then what you're really saying is you don't respect the other. You don't accept the other as an equal. And I think that's part of what you saw in the failure of October 7. With other words, the intelligence failure of October 7. It was not that Israel didn't know. It was not that Israelis didn't see it coming. It was that those were reporting the signals of it coming, reporting it up the ranks, were basically dismissed. And so I think that's the way I would position that targeted assassination policy. It's the notion that even if, or let me put it differently, even if you were to destroy Hamas or Hezbollah, in this situation, what comes next is going to be worse. And in a lot of ways, that progression you've seen as a result of the targeted assassination policy. Fact of the matter is that Hassan Nasrallah, just before his death, was willing to discuss a ceasefire that was not going to be an immediate linkage to a ceasefire in Gaza, but he was willing to do so conditionally, but would hopefully lead to a ceasefire in Gaza. That's at this point, as far as Hezbollah is concerned, off the table. So, with other words, you've seen a hardening of positions as a result of the targeted assassinations, and you were basically seeing that in Gaza with the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh.
Unmute. Okay. Can I talk? Yeah. Now,
No. Yossi's next.
Yours is next? Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead, yours.
I wanted, for the question of Jeff, I think there is another aspect, but especially the latest assassination of Nasrallah and Yahya
Sanwar.
Yes.
and others. Netanyahu, before the campaign in Lebanon, was doing very poorly in a poll. Was a lot of pressure on him. 500,000 Israeli, mostly Jews, in the streets. And suddenly, when he started with this paging campaign, remember, of exploding the pagers,
Yeah.
Hezbollah activists, and then assassination of Nasrallah, suddenly Netanyahu did very well in a poll. And with the killing of Sinwar, even more. So sometimes it's not like the idea of using force is like gaining point inside Israeli political arena. I'm the prime minister, and under my watch, I kill those guys, the bad guys. And the majority of Israeli Jews clap for him, even those who don't like him. And for him was an important move, He almost basically neutralized the whole movement to release the hostages. It was huge demonstration every Saturday. And he got very stressed over this. And when he started the campaign in Lebanon, the whole discussion have been completely changed. Although even now with assassinations of Sinwar, it's coming back, but not in the same force it used to be before. So this aspect of gaining political points inside Israeli society have very much also to do why I killed the bad guys and I'm the hero. And many Israeli Jews, including those who don't like him, thought that he was a hero, that he did the right thing without even looking what would be the next. Another thing I wanted to say about Kamala Harris. You know, when Obama was elected in 2008, I had the same feeling that under Obama there will be a game change. And I was disappointed. There are many reasons can be done, but when I'm watching the news and commentators and interview with the Democratic Party, mainstream, Congress people, senators, I get the impression that that Israel, among even those people, and even some liberal Democrat, it's very strong bonding. And Kamala Harris will be very careful whatever she goes, even if she personally believes. I heard her speech in a Democratic National Convention. She was the first candidate to forcefully say something that I never heard before, that the Palestinians have a right to live in peace and dignity and self-determination, and she made it in very loud voice, but I never heard this before. However, if she will be the president, she has to deal with the entire Democratic Party. And some of them are very staunch loyal to the Israeli government, even if they personally don't like Netanyahu, but they feel very deep bonding, it's called. Israel is one of us in the Middle East. The Arab world, the Palestinians are not one of us. They're not part of the Western blah, 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 but many of them in the US really strongly believe in this. This is why I said it's not gonna go easy, you know, for somebody like her, you know. If I can just quickly respond to Samir about why Israel. You know, I lived in Israel after the 67 war, and I heard the mentality. The mentality, we are strong, we are the strongest power in the Middle East, we can keep those territory as long as we want.
They were arrogant, yeah, they were arrogant. Yeah.
Okay. But Golan Heights was a territory that 120,000 Syrians have been expelled from. They've basically, except the Druze community, they got an empty free land to build settlements. They didn't have to purchase this land. They got it for military campaign of 6 days. You know, and the Labour Party, as far as the West Bank, they felt, you know, nothing to rush. There is no rush. Why should we rush to anything, you know? And the same thing with Sinai Desert. It was a huge territories. They consider Suez Canal, quote unquote, a comfortable security border with Egypt. And you're right, James, what you said about completely disrespect. They so much dismissed the Egyptian army that when came in Yom Kippur 73 was a big shock. The same happened in October 7, the same mentality. Yeah, but they you know, you have to put
Well, the Israelis should have learned after 73 war.
yourself in their shoes. You say, yeah, it doesn't make no sense. Why you want to keep it and not having peace? Peace.
No. I mean, they should have known that they cannot keep that land anymore.
Well, they keep it for 57 years, and many of them believe they can keep it another 57 years. I don't know if it's going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen.
Jimmy Carter came and told them, I need Egypt, a strategic ally, and the price is returning Sinai to Egypt. This was something that the Israeli leaders did not predict. But this is what happened. Egypt was close to Soviet Union, and Kissinger and Jimmy Carter succeeded to push Egypt to their side. And the price,
Carter was right.
and the price was return Sinai to Egypt. But this was the only thing. The Palestinians cannot give anything to the United States. Syria cannot give anything to the United States. So there is no rush on those territories. This is the way the mentality, you try to understand the Israeli leaders' mentality. This is the mentality. But
Well, it was wrong. They were wrong.
you can say it many times as you said wrong, but I don't know who said that Israel have to face Syria, Iraq. No, they do not face the Syrian armies. They do not face the Iraqi armies. They do not face the Lebanese army. They face only Hezbollah and Hamas. No Arab country, no Arab army is going to fight for the Palestinian cause, not at least in the near future. They don't want to be decimated by the Air Force, so they're not interested. You know, the Houthi once in a while sending some long-range missile, but it's
I
not.
mean, they didn't think that the Palestinian would have an uprising in 1987 or in the year 2000.
Samir, I just wanted to
let Yossi talk.
Okay,
All right.
I just wanted to say, because I lived in Israel for so many years and I follow the politics, and I'm trying to explain to you the mentality of the Israeli establishment, not just Netanyahu, Gantz, Yair Lapid, and all those guys, they see completely different. And they still have belief. And Netanyahu, yeah, you're right, he was brilliant in his strategy. He treated United States as a paper tiger. I don't have to worry. I have the Congress on my side. I have those guys on my side. I have the Democratic establishment on my side. So I don't have to worry so much. So I'm going to continue. Let's see what they're going to do. Remember, when he came to speak to the joint session of Congress, very few people boycotted him. The core of Democratic Party stood up and gave him standing ovation together with the Republican. You know, I mean, it's still there, and he know it, and he know very well how to play with this. You know, I'm on one of you. We are sharing democratic value. We're sharing Western value. And this is very much appeal to the American public opinion. You know, yeah, there are many young Americans oppose this, but what it's count is those who have the vote in the Congress, in the White House. You know. Anyway, I'm sorry I gave a little bit speech, but I thought it was important to make those points. Anyway.
Let me just briefly respond. One is I agree with you that Netanyahu has benefited significantly in terms of his popularity with the campaign in Lebanon, and the assassinations, as well as the killing of Yahya Sinwar. That doesn't mean, I mean, with other words, what I was saying, what you were saying may be very well complementary rather than mutually exclusive. The other thing is, and I think you're right, and I'm going to paraphrase what you said, you're right in suggesting that the issue in Israel is not Netanyahu. With other words, this is not all going to go away when Netanyahu steps aside or is pushed aside. The issue is much broader. The Israeli political military elite today is much more hardline than it was in the past. And of course, you have, the underlying social change, including within the military, where you're seeing a much greater influence of religious nationalist people coming out of religious seminaries that produce them for the military. In fact, it's some estimates, if you look at it, at the level of brigadier commander and lower, some estimates suggest that 40% of the officer corps at that level comes out of the religious Zionist movement. So, we're dealing with a very different Israel, and I think that's true.
Can I speak now? Jeff, am I next?
You're next.
Yes, Amir.
All right. What I want to say, what is the solution now? At this point, the United States, the Biden administration proposed the ceasefire proposal with the 3 phases, and that was a couple months ago, and Netanyahu rejected it. So, do you think that now Netanyahu is dictating what is going to happen and what is not going to happen, or the United States? I mean, who's the boss at this point? And what is the solution, the way out?
I mean, first of all, everybody knows what the solution is. Everybody's known what the solution in the Middle East is for decades. So it's not a question of having to grapple and figure out what the solution is. It's a question of whether or not the political will is there for a political solution.
Yes.
And the fact of the matter is it's not. In terms of who and what, I think at this point, and again, coming back to something that that Yossi said, or maybe it was Jeff. I mean, I'm not predicting a game changer with the elections. I don't know. What I do think is that we don't know, as long as we don't see what the outcome of the US election is, and get some sense of what those policies will be then. That's assuming that you get a harmonious transition, which we also don't know. So I find it, I find it very hard to predict at this moment who's gonna dictate what. I don't see the United States turning around 180 degrees and suddenly saying the buck stops here and this is it. I think it's going to be a much more checkered process, or layered process, if you wish.
So there is no hope.
There's always hope.
Well, I always believe that in one secular democratic state, one state, equal rights, and end of the story.
Look, I think one's got to be cautious.
It's nice to
no solution, whether it's a one-state solution or a two-state solution, is going to see a very harmonious, lovey-dovey relationship. My guess is that if you get an independent Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel, I would look at it as India and Pakistan rather than France and Germany.
Yeah,
this is going to be a long and torturous process.
It's better one state.
And so in that sense, a one-state solution and maybe a more dangerous solution at this point than a two-state solution. But these are going to be strained. These are going to be strained relations in which rebuilding trust and letting wounds heal on both sides of the divide is not going to be an overnight process.
They just need to copy what they did before, what they call proper Israel. Copy that.
Okay. I think that
be realistic than have some dreams, because the dreams only give you an illusion. An illusion, it's not good in politics.
James,
with that, I think that I want to close the session. I want to thank James Dorsey for his very sophisticated analysis and illuminating discussion. I want to remind people that the LA Jews for Peace Bank is now has a few $100s in it. We can restart our sessions, but it's a little bit low. So I call on you people to donate. If you don't know how to donate, give me a phone call or an email. And with that, I want to thank James once again.
And
Well, thank you. Please.
I just wanted James to tell us about his blog a little bit and YouTube and stuff like that. So if people want to follow you, how can they do it?
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
I will put that. I will put a link to your blog in the
Right.
email
let me
of the
type,
recording.
if I may, let me just type into what is the best URL here. Hold on. There we go. So basically, as I mentioned, I've had the blog for about 14 years. It today has a substantial following over multiple platforms. The core of the blog is my Substack column. That's also where the video and the audio first appears. I publish on average 2 to 3 times a week. It's very much, on the one hand, events driven, analytical. I'm not competing with news services. There's no way I can, nor do I wish to do so. But I try. What I try to do is write if and when I feel I have something to say that is different from what others are saying. I don't see a lot of point in regurgitating the choir or making sure that I'm part of a choir. The range goes from, obviously, for the last year, it's been Gaza, almost inevitably, as I think it was Dick or maybe it was Jeff who mentioned that sports have been the origin of it. But if you were to categorize the 3 main subjects that I focus on, it's geopolitics of the Muslim world, it's politics of religion, and I'll come back and end with that in a moment, and the politics of sports. What I mean with the politics of religion is that I just published a book 2 months ago, which was called The Battle for the Soul of Islam, and with the subtitle Redefining Islam in the 21st Century. And what that was looking at, or is looking at, is the battle for geopolitical and religious leadership in the Muslim world. And most people then will look at Middle Eastern states, with other words, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Turkey. Whereas what I'm suggesting is Qatar, Turkey are players, but the real battle is between Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Indonesia. And keep in mind that Indonesia is the world's largest or most populous Muslim majority state, and it's the world's most populous or largest Muslim democracy. And it has assets that no other Muslim state has. So you have civil society movements, one in particular that I focus on, that has a following of 90 million people. It has a 5 million strong militia. It has a network of tens of thousands of religious seminaries, of universities. It is a political player in government, was very influential in the Jokowi government that just terminated or handed over power on Sunday. And it's very influential in the forthcoming government under Prabowo. The importance of this is, and this is where I'll end, that what we see as reform, religious reform in the Gulf, has nothing to do with religious reform. It has to do with social reform. It's a socially more liberal, politically more repressive form of Islam. as opposed to what the Indonesians are proposing, which is reform of religious jurisprudence, anchoring change both in secular and in religious law, and most importantly, the guiding principle of Saudi Emirati Islam is absolute obedience to the ruler. Whereas the guiding principle of the Indonesian and the Indonesians and the Indonesian movement is unambiguous adherence to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, political pluralism, religious pluralism. So that's what I focus on.
I think you should come again to talk about this because it sounds very interesting.
I would be happy to anytime.
Okay.
But I'll leave that to the powers that be among you.
Yeah. I think it sounds very interesting. It's part of the world that we don't know too much.
Well, you can support by buying the book.
Again, can you repeat the name of the book?
The book, sorry, it's The Battle for the Soul of Islam.
I will put the book and the blog
And the
in
blog.
the email I send with the links to the recording.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I've really, this is a pleasure. I enjoyed the discussion and I learned a lot from it.
Thank you so much, James.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.